Buenos dias, Gunners Collective. Back at it, you already know. Like a motherfucking smack at it. And as you can tell by that thumbnail right there, we're talking about the Latino Kings, the Latin Kings. One of the oldest, largest groups in history. One of the largest street gangs that is also a prison gang organization on the East Coast, predominantly in Chicago and New York, but are in 31 different states. So let's get straight into it. And in that fashion, I'm going to give you guys the rich, deep history and the cultura into the Latin Kings as spoken by a real one, because real ones do real things, man. And in that fashion, let's get into it, homies. The Latin Kings, they're the oldest, largest, and most organized Hispanic street gang, which has its roots dating back to the 1940s in Chicago, Illinois. Latin King documents reveal a man by the name of Gino Gustavo Colon, aka Lord Gino, is considered the son of the almighty Latin King nation in Chicago and has been for a long time. Latin King headquarters is located on Beach and Spalding in northwest Chicago. Luis Felipe created his version of the almighty Latin Kings and Queen Nation manifesto based on teachings that he had picked up from his time in Chicago, the motherland. Felipe designated himself as Inca and Supreme Crown in 1995. Antonio Fernandez was designated Inca and Supreme Crown of New York State and New Jersey, and the ALKQN once again began a transformation. That's also known as the Latin Kings. This is the history of the Chicago Latin Kings. The almighty Latin King and Queen Nation is the largest Hispanic street gang in Chicago and the largest Chicago-based street gang in the United States. The ALKN has nearly 30,000 members in the city of Chicago, with another 10 to 15,000 members in the surrounding suburbs, with organized chapters of Latin Kings in over 31 states. The almighty Latin King Nation first emerged in Chicago during the 1940s when several young Puerto Rican males organized into a club. Their goal was to help each other overcome a problem of racism and prejudice that newly arriving Puerto Rican inmates were experiencing. Although the original members were of Puerto Rican descent, most members are now Mexican American. Besides these two groups, they are mostly composed of Dominican, Cuban, Mexicano, Central, and South American members, and some African American, Asian, and Middle Eastern members as well. As time progressed, the group's members became involved in violent crimes, including murder, drug trafficking, and robberies. Members of the almighty Latin King and Queen Nation vowed to lay down their lives for their nation. Unfortunately, this also meant extreme internal discipline and organized fear. Soon, the Latin Kings rose to be the most feared gang in the Illinois Department of Corrections, to the administration, the inmate population alike. In 2000, there was approximately 1,600 self-admitted Latin Kings in the Illinois prison system, and these accounted for over half of all recorded violent acts on prison personnel and other inmates, making the ALKN the most violent prison gang in Illinois. A couple examples of the Latin King's ruthlessness are the stories of Carlos Robles and Officer Lawrence Cush. This is a crazy story which I'm about to run down, so take heed. This motherfucking shit is crazy, right? In 1981, the leader of Chicago's Southside chapter, one Raul Gonzalez, aka Baby King of the Latin Kings, had a run-in with a member of the Northside chapter of the Latin Kings. What happened was that the leader, Baby King, was basically disrespected by an inmate known as Carlos Robles. Because Robles was basically in the same gang, just in a different geographical unit, Baby King approached the leader of the Northside chapter of the LKN, Gino Colon, and got his blessing to change Carlos Robles permanently before he was released. About 2 years later, when he was in the Illinois State Penitentiary, inmate Robles would get his violation for disrespecting the Southside leader of the ALKN. 2 of the members of the Southside LKN chapter were chosen for the hit. Robles was to be murdered. These were 2 crazy gang members, 2 of the craziest ones from the gang. The way the hit was carried out was quite clever. The 2 men intending to kill Carlos basically told him they were throwing him a going-away party. Robles was scheduled to be paroled in 2 days when the hit took place in July 1983. As is common in corrupting correctional staff, the 2 hitmen got permission from the cell house guard to use the basement for the going-away party. The basement of the cell house unit has the showers, is where the showers are placed where the inmates use. Carlos entered the basement of the cell house with the 2 in for his parole party. They proceeded to use their homemade weapons, not little shanks, as homemade knives are called, but but rather the much longer machetes, usually about 2 feet long and made out of heavy gauge steel. First, they cut off Carlos's head, then one arm, then the other arm. With the little hacking off went one leg and then the other. They chopped up the torso, cutting it into small pieces. The head was the only body part that could not be sliced up into smaller pieces. The arms and legs were then chopped into smaller pieces. Blood was everywhere. But all the two guys did was turn on the showers and let the blood run down the drain, basically washing off the body parts. Members of their own gang cooperating upstairs in the cell house helped next as the two guys placed the body parts in the plastic bags as a diversion. A fight was staged. This allowed the two guys to go through the tunnel, which led to what was known then as the butcher shop area of the prison kitchen. The black inmate working in the butcher shop that day was a member of the Gangster Disciples, and as a folks gang, is always opposed to Latin Kings, a people's gang. The two wackos asked him for a favor, for which they would return some drugs and cash money to him. They asked him to grind up the body parts in the older meat grinder that was there, and very large commercial grade meat grinder it was. On that menu that evening meal at the night at Stateville Penitentiary was meatloaf. The GD in charge of the butcher shop once offered the drugs and money to grind up the body parts, simply asked, "Who is this in the bag?" The two guys replied, "He is one of our own, not one of yours." The GD then agreed and ground up the body parts with the pork and beef that was also going into the meatloaf meal that evening. Shortly before the bells rung for the inmates to go to evening chow in the inmate dining room, two gangs already had much advanced warning about what not to eat that night. The GDs and Latin Kings spread the word amongst themselves, "Don't eat on the main line tonight in the dining hall." Only the gangs that did not know the recipe for the meatloaf ate their food. Some inmate chowhounds were pleasantly surprised to find so many friendly Latin Kings and GDs offering their entire evening meal for that night. No traces of the skin, bones, teeth, or blood of Carlos Robles were ever found. That is for years. The skull bone apparently simply rolled around in the meat grinder like a basketball spinning on a net rim, and thus it had to be buried. The skull was dug up in 1995 in the yard at Statesville Prison. And on July 1st, 1989, a correctional officer at the Statesville Correctional Center, Lawrence Cush Jr., was assassinated by the Latin Kings while on the job. Attacked from behind with pipes and other weapons, Cush would die a day later, but was one of 30 officers on a hit list prepared by the Latin Kings. Why did the Latin Kings target correctional officers, you ask yourself? Clearly, all evidence points to one thing. The officers were doing their job, and that meant that they were a threat to inside drug business of the Latin Kings. This incident and many others sent chills up everyone's spines as a forewarning to avoid any conflict or confrontation with the Latin Kings. The gang has organized chapters in numerous states across the country. These gangs sets are referred to as chapters, with each reporting to an Inca and Caquita. The head or heads of the entire criminal organization are known as coronas. One of the characteristics that sets the Latin Kings apart from other gangs is they consider themselves to be a community-based organization. Because of their apparent contradiction, it is often debated about whether they are a criminal organization or a positive force in the community, as they are obviously taking on both sides and both roles in points of time. They preach Hispanic pride, and all Latin Kings are encouraged to live in accordance with the principles of Kingism, a moral-driven awareness of social oppression and the desire to uplift their people to the rightful place amongst the thrones of kings and queens. The Latin Kings operate under strict rules and guidelines that are conveyed in a lengthy constitution and follow the teachings of the ALKQN Manifesto, which was written by highly intellectual Latin Kings. In this manifesto, you can find traces of Marxism, Christianity, and other revolutionary historical worldviews, which then combined make up the ideology and morality of Kingism, which are centered around the upliftment of the poor, the oppressed third world people. These are my type of motherfuckers right here. Latin Kings, man, stand up. Amor rey. And the struggle against the oppressive social, political, and economic existing order of things. Let's get to it, man. Spence on la tira. To begin their meetings, members may face east, which is where the sun rises, and recite one of the various Latin King prayers to the Almighty Father and King of Kings, the pledge to be ever faithful to the nation. These meetings are also used by members to discuss recent events, due retaliation, position responsibilities, and elections, etc. When compared to most street gangs, the Latin Kings are generally more structured and organized. The gang rules are strictly enforced, and some members celebrate January 6th as King's Holy Day, the first week of March as King's Week. The New York Latin King breakdown. To avoid imprisonment for his criminal activities in Chicago, Luis Felipe moved to New York, where he was later convicted of killing his girlfriend, which he claimed was a drunken accident. While in jail, he started the New York chapter of the Latin Kings, which grew rapidly. Using handwritten letters, he gave members orders to kill enemies as well as other Latin kings in order to preserve discipline. Felipe's gang was highly organized. From 1986 to the internal power struggle that erupted in 1994, the ALKQN, which solidified its role as a gang, strong enough crimes such as murder, racketeering, and RICO Act charges began to take place. In 1991, Felipe was returned to prison after a short release for parole violations stemming from the receipt of stolen goods. Felipe would continue, however, to guide the Latin King members, who now totaled about 2,000 members, both incarcerated and free. In 1994, with the rapid growth of the Latin Kings, an internal power struggle erupted and violence within the Kings ensued. Between June 1993 and February 1994, 7 Latin Kings were murdered following the outbursts and outbreaks of internal gang violence. Luis Felipe and 19 others were charged with murder and racketeering, and indictments would end in 1995 with 39 Latin Kings and 1 Latin Queen indicted under the RICO Act. The details of the charges against Felipe would later become known. Felipe was charged with ordering the killing of William Littleman Cartagena. Cartagena was taken to an abandoned Bronx apartment where he was strangled, decapitated, mutilated, and his corpse set on fire. The murder allegedly due to Cartagena's failure to kill enemies quick enough, as well as people that left and did theft from the organization. In 1996, following the trial of Luis Felipe, Antonio Fernandez, who was recently blessed as the Inca and Supreme Crown of New York State and New Jersey, told his people to look for Nicole in Pennsylvania and kneeled with other Latin kings in front of the Federal District Court in Manhattan, and is quoted as stating, "It is time for a fresh start. Now they can't afford our pain against us." In 1996, it's believed to be the beginning of the Latin Kings transformation from street gang to a street organization. Latin kings and queens began appearing in mass at political demonstrations in support of the Latino community. To further transformation and efforts to legitimize the organization began to hold its monthly meetings at St. Mary's Episcopal Church in West Harlem. At this time, the members of the Latin Kings is believed to have swelled to 3,000 incarcerated and 4,000 free. The monthly universals are drawing an attendance of 500 to 600 regularly. Internal changes to the organization begin to take place as Fernandez began to gain more power. They started to implement a paramilitary structure and new procedures for handling the organizational grievance, and removing death as a possible punishment, replace it with vanishing as an act of banishment from the movement. Basically, fools were coming up missing if you went in bad standings. For the Latin Kings, 1997 began with Felipe being sentenced to the harshest penalty passed down since World War II. Felipe was sentenced to 250 years in prison, the first 45 to be spent in solitary confinement. The other 39 members were sentenced to an average of 20 years in prison for their roles in the crimes. The year would bring further legal troubles as Fernandez and 31 others are arrested in a raid in the Lower East Side and charged with disorderly conduct. The Special Commissioner of Investigations for Schools soon after charged the Latin Kings with infiltrating the school system. A school security guard with 5 years of service was dismissed on charges of unprofessional conduct for his association with the Latin Kings. The year came to a close with King Tone being arrested in December by the FBI for domestic abuse. The pending charges against Fernandez were dropped in early 1998 following the release of Fernandez, a joint operation of the FBI, New York City Police Department, and Immigration and Nationalization Services, New York State Police, and drug enforcement agencies came to a close with the arrest of 92 suspected Latin King members. The Latin King leadership insists over half of those arrested are not members. The operation, dubbed Operation Crown, cost the city over $1 million and took 19 months to complete. Fernandez was released after 4 days on $350,000 bail, which was paid by contributions from community members. Over half of the arrested were charged with misdemeanors. Others were charged with weapon possession and drug dealing. Fernandez was eventually permitted to go on house arrest to attend monthly services, universal meetings. It was during his time on house arrest that Latin Queens underwent a shakeup in leadership, dismissing many of the leaders in order to bring in more politically focused members. The Latin Kings during this period began to gain legitimacy. First, Lolita Lebron, the Puerto Rican terrorist who was a member of the Puerto Rican Nationalists, appointed the Latin Kings to protect her during a demonstration in front of the United Nations. Next, many gang leaders were indicted again. Once again, they were indicted on behalf of the memberships of being supposed Latin King members. These kids are hope for a liberation and struggle, and instead are being sacrificed at the altar of many kings. In 1995, Fernandez pleaded guilty to conspiracy to sell and distribute heroin. In 1996, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison, which he is serving at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. In Kansas, he was placed in solitary confinement. He eventually transferred again and was placed in general population. So basically, the Latin Kings is an organization that had spawned from being one club to a gang, And I got a lot of respect for the Latin Kings. I've met a lot of members of the Latin Kings, over the years, and I've heard a lot of stories. Their predominant colors are black and gold, and they're with the business. Now, a lot of people get them confused. Being from California, you'll get them confused with a Southsider gang that is from LA that also calls themselves Barrio Latin Kings. They have nothing to do with the Latin Kings of Chicago and New York, but do carry the same name for their barrio. How that name was established for them, I can't call it like an alcoholic, but I will say that they're a very respected group and gang within the LA area. Now, as far as the Latin Kings go in New York and Chicago, they're very feared. They're very feared. Being from the People's Nation, they do get into it with Gangster Disciples. That's a lifelong enemy, and several other gangs and groups. Coming from an urban-based populated place like New York and Chicago, you got to understand that these guys are with the business. As we all know, in Chirac, Chicago, it goes down every night. Shots are rang out, and believe half those shots that are being fired in the air or being fired at known enemigas are coming from the Latin Kings. What trips me out is the population of Mexicanos that is in New York and Chicago. I've always known about the Trinitarios, the Dominican gangs. I've always known about the Puerto Rican population. But now we're starting to see a lot more Mexican Americans than ever, based in New York, as well as Chicago. Traditionally, when you think Chicago, you think the African American community, and you also think the outfit, which is the Cosa Nostra of Chicago, the Italian gangs that were formed there back in the 30s and 20s. But the Latin Kings have been around since the 40s and well established. Of course, that is called the Stronghold, or another word for them that they use is called the Motherland. Now, as far as New York is what they call the bloodline, from what I've been told, and the bloodline meaning is the new generation, is the new soldados that keep it going. Now, what's always tripped me out is how closely the Latin Kings resemble Norteños of California. Very military based, very structured, very militant in their thinking, and very organized, and that always reminded me of the Norteño organization and the Norteño gangs in California, that roll hand in hand, basically similar. Now, I have done time with a few Latin Kings, that I ran into, one out of Chicago and one out of New York, and one also when I was younger. Can't call it like an alcoholic as far as what his name was, but the other two, one's name was PB and the other one was Droopy. Droopy being from Chicago, and he ran me a little bit down about the Latin Kings. And what I could say, and from what you heard in the stories, man, they're a very dangerous group and they don't play. Their allegiance and their beliefs are strong. They really are true believers in their cause, and they push for that. And a lot of people get the game twisted. They think that this group right here, for one reason or another, are very religious or very this or very that. But at the end of the day, man, they're a criminal organization that are not to be fooled or played with, that will end your life very quick. So that was kind of my little spiel on the Latin Kings. I just wanted to read from a few little excerpts and also give you my little take on the Latin Kings. Amor de Rey, meaning I got a lot of respect for them. Shout out some respect. At the end of the day, man, these motherfuckers are with the business. It's cool to touch on these different areas and the different geography makeups of these gangs, man, because it's not all about Califas. And Califas, of course, first and foremost, we're going to be on the West Coast and give love and respect to those around us and those of what we know. But this channel is based on all people and bringing all people together. At the end of the day, man, my hope and my blessings are that we get black and brown united, and that we bring all people together as one, and that we stop the violence. And in saying so, man, we're going to keep moving fast with a purpose. Hopefully you guys get everything that you want coming to you. Move fast with a purpose. That's going out there and getting it hustling. You know what it is, man. Take care of your familia. Take care of those around you. And do what you do, man. The gun. Bang, bang.